This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream. Get free access to Nebula, the streaming platform built by all of your favorite YouTubers, when you sign up at CuriosityStream at the link below. So last time on the channel, I talked about #ReleaseTheSnyder Cut and similar fan activist movements like it. One of those revolved around getting Richard Donner's version of Superman 2 released. And if you remember, a part of that specific fan movement was a bootleg fan edit that bounced around the internet in the early 2000s. Now, originally, that section of my video was much longer and really dove into the phenomenon of fan edits, but I ended up cutting it back, partly just to help streamline the narrative of that particular video, but also because the further that I looked into the subject, the more I saw that I couldn't really do it justice in just a couple of minutes of screen time. This needed an entire video on its own. 'Cause I went down the rabbit hole in this stuff. And it gets weird. The entire concept of a fan putting together their own cut of a movie is still something relatively new within film culture, but the arrival of the internet changed everything. Back in the halcyon days of Napster and LimeWire, there was a little project that made the rounds called the Phantom Edit. Now, I have no doubt that there were folks putting together their own cuts long before this. Return of the Jedi with 75% fewer Ewoks. The 1989 Batman, where Alfred doesn't let Vicky Vale into the Batcave. But this was the first fan edit that really got people to sit up and pay attention, and the first to garner any real publicity or notoriety. Barely a year after The Phantom Menace's release, an editor named Mike Nichols, but not that Mike Nichols, released his own version of the film online that was about 20 minutes shorter than the original, and famously, cut Jar Jar Binks out of the movie. Except not really. For some reason, that was the narrative that the press ran with at the time, and while Nichols certainly did eliminate a lot of Jar Jar's antics throughout, it would have been impossible to cut the character out entirely. No, Nichols' concerns went far beyond Jar Jar, and were far more fundamental than that.
You know, it's George Lucas's film. It's his story. And I actually think in several instances throughout this movie that he didn't even stay true to his own story. A lot of people tuned out and said that, he'd lost his touch or whatever else like that, and sort of dismissed this movie as I don't think it's any big secret, but a lot of people just felt that this movie was a piece of crap. Being an editor, you want to take what's there and try to make it the best possible. I guess that's what I was trying to do.
And a lot of the trims he made throughout actually genuinely helped to improve the overall film. And it's not just that there are less of the sillier gags throughout, or that Qui-Gon's explanation of midichlorians has been completely removed, but that it tightens up the pacing and the progression of the story. Phantom Menace has a number of scenes where characters just stand around and restate events that we've already seen, or conversations we've already heard. The short scene where Anakin says goodbye to C-3PO, for instance, is pretty much exactly that, and therefore not found in the Phantom Edit. But the most important thing I think Nichols altered in the film was Anakin's characterization itself.
He is potentially the most advanced Jedi in the existence of George Lucas's entire Star Wars universe. That I guess you sort of expect him to be a little more like a Good Will Hunting young searching for Bobby Fischer kind of character, which really isn't the case here. To make all his accomplishments and his victories and successes in everything that he does be a result of accident. For instance, he accidentally hits a button which ends up destroying the ship at the end, and oopses, and a lot of little things like that to glorify that his accidents are the reason that he's a hero. Sort of seems to go against the whole idea that he's this powerful Jedi, and actually parallels the character that most people can't stand, which is Jar Jar, because he's the one who becomes a hero by accident. But to parallel that with Anakin, that everything that he does is not because he's intelligent or powerful or a potential Jedi, but for the same reasons as a happy accident, it really makes no sense to the character. And those I guess most predominantly are a lot of the changes that I edited out, because I really just think for his character to remove those things makes him a stronger, more cunning, more intelligent character by simple uses of editing.
Now, the strangeness of the Phantom Edit's very existence can't be understated. It was an outcome of this strange confluence of events in the early 2000s, where you had off-the-shelf editing software becoming cheaper and more accessible, the mass distribution platform of the internet, the likes of which the world had never before seen, and the fact that the internet was pretty fantastic from the get-go at serving as a platform for communities to be built around anything and everything you can think of, all three elements of which have obviously only grown in the years since. The Phantom Edit opened the floodgates, and by the time that Mike Nichols got around to creating his own trimmed-down version of Attack of the Clones, there was an entire underground world of rogue editors that had spread across the internet. There's the Kubrick edit of Artificial Intelligence, the Purist edit of The Two Towers, the Greater Scott edition of Back to the Future, 12 dozen edits of The Hobbit, the chronological cut of Pulp Fiction. Topher Grace is apparently quite the accomplished fan editor. Steven Soderbergh's even gotten in on the game. So I've spent the last week basically living on fanedit.org and other forums like it, and after sifting through hundreds and hundreds of fan projects, I would like to present some findings. I think you could divide these edits up into 3 specific categories. If you've ever wanted to see Star Wars presented as a silent film in black and white Academy ratio complete with title cards, there's a fan edit for you. If you've ever wanted to see the original Planet of the Apes recut into a 25-minute episode of The Twilight Zone, there's a fan edit for you. And it's kind of amazing.
For civilization to survive, the human race has to remain civilized. Tonight's very small exercise in logic from The Twilight Zone.
The films that fit the mold of this category aren't so much about trying to fix a movie's story or tonality, but remixing them into different experiences, sometimes vastly different than the original. For instance, there's Bateman Begins, which merges American Psycho and Batman Begins into one terrifyingly psychotic mashup. Then there's the Memento Mori edit of Christopher Nolan's Insomnia, which completely reorganizes the story and, like Memento, tells it in reverse. And now I kind of want to see all of Nolan's movies like that. Now, here's one that takes a bit of explaining. Right around the time that Revenge of the Sith was released in 2005, there was a work print that somehow got leaked that was sold as a bootleg DVD in China. Now, whoever put that DVD together obviously included Chinese subtitles of the movie, but they also included an English subtitle track. However, that English subtitle track wasn't transcribed from the movie's actual dialogue, but was translated from the Chinese subtitles. So English to Chinese back to English, and in the process, things were gloriously muddled. The title, for instance, somehow went from Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith to Star War, The Third Gathers, The Backstroke of the West. And it just gets better from there. So much so that several years ago, a group of fans did the Lord's work and brought that subtitle track to life in a dubbed version that's just delightful.
Why such? You are a good man. Do not do like this.
I can't lose again. Your elephant loses my mother so. I am more than any hero's geologic changes, strong and big. I do so is for protecting you.
The Presbyterian Church, like, enjoys you not. You not strange, do they do not seal you as them?
I feel grateful you very much to my cultivation. I always eyes inside no man. I apologize to you.
Under your exasperation, you killed her.
Impossible. I can feel she returned on the hoof. Do not war!
This is canon, by the way, and no one can tell me otherwise. Backstroke of the West, which I will now and forever consider to be that movie's actual title, is just one of a plethora of Star Wars edits out there. More than any other film franchise, fans have been and continue to be obsessed with remixing all of the films, the original trilogy included, and more importantly, trying to fix the things that they think are wrong. And this takes us right into our second category. The Phantom Edit is the godfather of this kind of fan edit that's born in dissatisfaction and that seeks to create the best possible version of the film in question. So Legolas skateboarding, that's out. Save Martha? No way. The Architect? Get him out of there. Tobey Maguire doing this? Not a chance. Now, it's probably a good time to switch gears just slightly, so we can take a minute and do a little armchair philosophy. The entire concept of a fan edit is just one part of the wider world of remix culture, sitting somewhere in between fan art and fan fiction, all of it drenched in a kind of postmodern flavor. Now, within postmodernism, objectivity is really whatever you decide that it is. And in the same way, the very concept of a fan edit screams that art is kind of relative. Don't like something? Change it. Want to see a different version? Go for it. More than ever before in the world of film, the art itself is malleable and open to extreme manipulation, so much so that the artists, the filmmakers, aren't necessarily the sole authors anymore. I said that things get weird. This is where you have things like the No Manson family edition of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is exactly what it sounds like. Just a very bloodless, 90-minute sweet little story about a washed-up actor and a stuntman buddy just hanging out and driving around Los Angeles.
Here I come. Here I come.
Following in its footsteps, you've got things like the Kirkless version of Star Trek Generations and the No Dancing edition of La La Land, both of which, again, are exactly what they sound like. And from one perspective, I think it would be really easy to make an argument against all of this. Wait a minute, you don't have to like a movie, but it's not yours to change. You didn't make it, you don't own it. It doesn't matter whether it's good or not, you don't get to dictate to the artist what their work should be. However, from the opposite perspective, there's undeniably something to be said for the fact that once a work is published and is out into the world, it doesn't entirely belong to the artist anymore. There is a sense of ownership that every fan feels for their favorite movies and books and music that I think can be totally appropriate. I've looked at a lot of these fan edits, and I think it would be dishonest to try and paint those who create them as somehow entitled or arrogant, or has the word toxic run its course yet? Let's just say it has. I don't think that most of the folks who create these edits are trying to say that their version replaces the original, but that it exists alongside it as its own unique experience. Also, not for nothing, but a lot of fan editors include some kind of disclaimer at the beginning of their movie or in the download information that urges people not to download unless they already own the movie in question on Blu-ray or DVD. Not that that's necessarily stopped anybody from downloading before, or that it prevents any potential legal action, but hey, it's the thought that counts, right? Let me also be clear and say that I think that many of these fan edits are not just intellectually fascinating, but are incredibly well conceived and put together. And sometimes they go beyond just simply fixing perceived flaws or wild experimentation. And that takes us right into the 3 stories that make up our final category. Brian De Palma's 1992 film Raising Cain is a really curious case. De Palma had trouble putting together an edit that satisfied him, so as a result, he wound up drastically rearranging the structure of the film to play out, more or less, in chronological order, whereas the original script had events play out of sequence. 20 years after its release, an early draft of the film's screenplay leaked online, and using that as a guide, an editor by the name of Pete Gelderblum took matters into his own hands, reconstructed the film as much as he could to fit in with De Palma's original intentions, released it online, and wouldn't you know it, Brian De Palma himself not only watched the cut, but was so impressed that he reached out to Gelderblum and asked if he could include it on the film's forthcoming Blu-ray. A fan edit is now the officially titled director's cut of Raising Cain. And that is so cool. Someone else who should do the exact same thing with a fan edit is George Lucas. I won't harp on this too much because the man gets enough crap, and this is something that I'm sure a lot of you know about already, and it's something that I've talked about on my channel before, but Harmy's despecialized editions of the original Star Wars trilogy are the absolute gold standard. The amount of work that's gone into them is just staggering. For me, this is Star Wars. I pretty much flat out refuse to watch any other version of the original trilogy. But the fan restoration that I really want to highlight is one that you may not have heard of before. Longtime viewers of the channel will know how much I love the work of animation director Richard Williams. The guy was an absolute legend, and the project that followed him around for decades was a little story called The Thief and the Cobbler. Like Terry Gilliam and The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, The Thief and the Cobbler was in and out of production for 30 years. Funding was found and then lost, investors signed on and then dropped out, the screenplay was constantly being redone and then redone again, and the scope of what Williams wanted to do kept expanding and growing grander and grander. Finally, after the success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, for which Williams oversaw and directed the animation, Warner Brothers signed on to provide the funding needed for completion and to distribute the finished film. And then everything went to hell. To make a long story short, the production ran way behind schedule, went way over budget, Warner Brothers lost all confidence and backed out, a Bond company seized control of the film, fired Williams, and a very mangled version of The Thief and the Cobbler was released twice by 2 different companies under 2 different titles, and both were just flat out terrible. However, years later, a fan named Garrett Gilchrist released what's arguably the most extreme and, in my opinion, the most important fan edit of all time, the re-cobbled cut. For years, Gilchrist toiled away, reconstructing a version that was as close as possible to Williams' original vision, Frankensteining a cut together from a bootleg of Williams' own work print, from pencil sketches, storyboards, from material submitted by some of the film's own animators, and from 35mm footage that Gilchrist himself restored. And the result is stunning. It is an extraordinary restoration, bringing back to life a film that was otherwise dead and buried. And in my book, this is fan culture at its absolute best. To begin to wrap all of this up, in my research for this video, I came across an interesting quote from Brian Konietzko, one of the creators of Avatar: The Last Airbender. He wrote, "I remember back in the Avatar days, the typical fan art we would get would be a charming, childish crayon drawing stuffed in an envelope. Nowadays on Korra, I take a skewed screenshot with my phone, post it, and shortly thereafter, someone unskews it, crops it, separates the character levels, clones the background, Ken burns it with a multi-level slide, animates the characters blinking and talking, tints it, and makes a GIF out of it, that I then see on the same phone with which I took the original picture. Times they are a-changin'." There's a fascinating question at the heart of that I think is worth considering. Where will all of this go in the future? Just look at the evolution of fan edits in the context of the Star Wars films alone. 20 years ago, we had a fan just simply trimming and rearranging scenes for The Phantom Menace. But by the time that we get to The Rise of Skywalker, it's a much bigger operation. There was a specific edit released not too long ago with the subtitle Ascendant, which did all of the normal things that fan edits do. Rearranged scenes, trimmed things out, cut lines of dialogue, but then went further by inserting entirely new shots and new CG elements created by the fans themselves. The theatrical film, for instance, cuts straight from the opening shot of TIE fighters flying overhead to a tight close-up of Kylo Ren. But Ascendant inserts a completely original overhead establishing shot in between them. And that's not all. The TIE fighter Kylo Ren takes to Exegol has been swapped for an Imperial shuttle, the vat of Snoke clones has been replaced with Palpatine clones, the Knights of Ren now have dialogue, there are Force ghosts that show up to help Rey fight Palpatine, Kylo Ren himself appears as a ghost alongside Luke and Leia in the movie's final scene. The very last shot of the film replaces Rey standing awkwardly with the Falcon jumping to hyperspace. Oh, and Leia's lightsaber is now purple. And all of this is impressive, don't get me wrong. You look at something like Ghost Kylo and you think, yeah, that makes sense. Why wasn't he there in the actual film? But the ramifications of changes like these and what it means for the future is something else. Again, look at how fast things have evolved. If this is where things have gone in just 20 years' time, imagine where we'll be 20 years from now. It's not entirely unreasonable to think that within that time we could see some wildly dedicated fan go and make a version of the Phantom Menace that's actually free of Jar Jar. Or combine all of this with the advancements made with deepfake technology. It's not out of the realm of possibilities that some diehard Lord of the Rings fans could get together, shoot some new footage, slap the actors' faces on their own, and add in the Scouring of the Shire to Return to the King. It may not be any good, but that isn't really the point. The point is that, in all likelihood, we're only at the beginning of the phenomenon of fan edits. They're not going anywhere, and they're only going to get bigger and grander from here. And I'm fascinated to see what they do next. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you probably know that I'm always trying to strike a balance in the topics that I choose. Film history is such a fascinating and rich subject full of new avenues to always discover. But one of the problems with that is that YouTube's algorithms tend to favor videos that only talk about the most popular films being released. And that's why I want to tell you about Nebula, a subscription-based streaming platform developed by and featuring creators like myself. It's a place where we can experiment with different kinds of content without the headaches of demonetization and the effects of the YouTube algorithm. It's a place where you can not only watch my videos ad-free, but it's a place where you can also check out some really incredible original content. But it gets even better. I'm sure you've heard of CuriosityStream, but if you haven't, they are a wonderful home to thousands of top-quality documentaries and non-fiction shows on a wide variety of subjects, like their great series Dream the Future. If you liked my video about the evolution of fan edits and restorations, check out this series, which dives into the fascinating possibilities and directions that art and entertainment may in fact take over the next few decades. Now, the good folks at CuriosityStream have partnered with Nebula to create a bundle. So if you sign up for CuriosityStream using the link below, you'll get Nebula for free. 2 streaming services for the price of 1. So much amazing content to dive into, and by signing up, you'll be supporting independent creators like myself. So head over to the link in the description to sign up today. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.